Hi, I'm Nathan Glass, and today we're talking about how much business insurance do you need? I'm Nathan Glass, founder and CEO of Utopia Risk Solutions, and so many business owners want to know if they're sufficiently covered. How much business insurance do they need for their company? And the question actually has two different answers. There's the property side of things, and there's the liability side of things. So for the property side of things, we're going to start there because it's just honestly much easier to answer. You're really just figuring out how much it would cost to replace that particular item, whether or not it's your building or your equipment or your autos, figuring out how much it would cost to replace and covering it for that amount. For your autos, easy to go to a place like Kelley Blue Book to figure out how much they're worth. For your equipment, go to the manufacturer, see how much it costs to buy that brand new. And for your building, usually the underwriters are going to have some sort of calculation that they're using, a price per square foot, to figure out how much it would cost to replace. But if you're looking for a second opinion, you can always contact local contractors and ask them how much they're charging in terms of a price per square foot for a rebuild. So that's the property side of things. The other thing to kind of note here is that you probably just want to review those limits annually. From year to year, they probably won't change too much, but it's good to stay on top of it so you don't all of a sudden, a year or two down the line, find yourself a little underinsured. Now, regarding the liability side of things, this is less clear. The reason being is that it's really a probability game that you're playing. You're never going to be 100% certain that you are sufficiently covered. And actually, this is really well illustrated by this new software that came out for the cyber liability side of things. And what it does is it takes the size of the company, the industry, and the number of personal information records, and it really calculates the likelihood that a certain level of coverage will be sufficient in the event of a claim. And so we actually ran this scenario with a company that was doing $100 million in revenue and had a $10 million cyber liability policy. And what they found was they were 95% likely to be covered in the event of a claim, which is good. It met their risk tolerance, and so that was sufficient for them. Now, if they were less risk tolerant, they wanted closer to a 99%, maybe we needed to bump up a little bit. Or if they were a little more risk tolerant, could have gone down. The important thing to note from this scenario is that you're never going to be 100% covered. It's just, unfortunately, not the world we live in when it comes to liability. So you need to figure out what level you're comfortable with. So that's the first thing. Know your risk tolerance. Second of all, it's going to change depending on what industry you're in. A contractor is going to have a greater general liability exposure than, say, a CPA. Somebody's more likely to get hurt by a contractor and on a job site than they are in the office of a CPA. Conversely, they have different cyber liability exposures. Contractors, less exposure for cyber liability than a CPA. So this is going to fluctuate from one policy to the next. So in addition to the industry, you need to look at the size of the company. $500,000 in revenue, going to be much different exposure than $50 million in revenue. So you're going to use that to gauge your exposure as well. Sometimes what happens is that the contracts that you have actually influence this a little bit. So maybe you have a contract requirement that you need to meet, and that's where you get your liability limits from. Now, the other thing that really puts a twist on this is where you're located is also going to factor into your exposure. Unfortunately, there are states where it's a more favorable position from the consumer than it is from the business. And so you just have to recognize the legal environment that you're in and adjust the insurance accordingly. Now, I hope you found this helpful. If you have any other questions and are looking for guidance, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to help.